Moving on to the next example, example 26 in the source code that's available for download along with this lecture. You can fake public and private object properties in JavaScript. If you're used to coding in Java or C++, you know that every object has access modifiers for its member variables and member functions. Java, C++, and many other object-oriented programming languages have the notion of access modifiers. These access modifiers allow properties of an object to be marked as public, private, or protected. If you've not worked in other languages, this may not make much sense to you, but we'll explain it, do not worry. So the properties of an object is a very JavaScript term. In Java or C++, you'll call it members of a class, but they mean exactly the same thing. So the members of a class or the properties of an object in JavaScript can be faked to be public or private and made to work just like access modifiers, public, private, and protected work in Java or C++. The three types of access modifiers that programmers in Java and C++ would have dealt with are public, private, or protected. Each of these have a specific meaning. It basically defines who can access a certain property. Public properties are accessible to all code, whether that code lives inside an object or outside an object. When a property is public, anyone, anywhere in the world of JavaScript, once they have an object, they can access the public properties. Private properties are accessible only within the object itself, which means code which lives outside the object cannot access private properties. They cannot see private properties. They won't know it exists. Accessing private properties would show up as an error. Protected properties are accessible only to objects that inherit from an object. We haven't spoken about inheritance yet, so don't worry too much about it. But when one object inherits from another, the second object can view the protected properties and access the protected properties of the object it inherits from. Now, JavaScript does not have a built-in notion of public and private properties. So why are they important? Why would we want to have public and private properties in JavaScript if it doesn't support them? There's a very clear and simple reason for that. Many experienced programmers naturally think in terms of public, private, and protected. Public, private, and protected enforce certain design constraints which are good for the maintainability and readability of your code. So even though JavaScript does not explicitly support these access modifiers, people have found ways to mimic them. People have seen it's useful to have private members which external code can't touch. It's useful to have public members which are meant for external code to access within an object. Understanding this utility is why ways have been found to mimic public and private in JavaScript. All the JavaScript object properties that we've seen so far have been public properties. They are public by default, and we've used the default way to set these up, which means they've only been public properties. We've not seen any other kind of properties. Public properties are accessible to code outside the object. And if you remember, in all our examples, we've accessed every property of the object with no trouble. They are public properties. To make a property private, just make that property local to the constructor. If you remember local variables from way back when, earlier part of JavaScript where things seemed very easy, make a variable local to the constructor. That variable is a private property. Doesn't make sense? Let's see it in action. Take a look at the code on screen. This is an object constructor for the rectangle, and we've seen this before. It looks a little different now though. In addition to length, breadth, and color, which are the public properties of rectangle, we have a private variable called private var and a function property. We'll zero in on the part that's different. Notice this local variable. It's local to the function rectangle, which is an object constructor. This private variable is just a string. It just says that it's a secret that I'm also a square. I don't want anyone to know this. We declare it as a variable. Notice the var keyword to declare private var as a variable which holds a string and as a local variable within the function. It's important that you do not forget the var keyword. The var keywords, the presence of the var keyword is what makes this a local variable rather than a global. Do not trip up on that. Once you declare private var as a local variable, we can still access this variable from anywhere inside any other property of the rectangle object. So within the object, this variable is accessible. But if any outside code tries to access this particular variable, and you can see it on screen, the part that we've highlighted, from outside in a function object stuff, we try to access rectangle2.privateVar. This access will result in an undefined. Code which lives outside the rectangle object cannot see this variable. As far as they are concerned, this variable does not exist, which is why console.log rectangle2.privateVar will simply print undefined. That's JavaScript way of saying that this does not exist as far as you are concerned. As far as outside code is concerned, private var is undefined. However, code outside the object which calls the property function that accesses this private variable works just fine. So if you go back and look at our rectangle object constructor, you'll notice that there is one function within this called sayHello, which accesses this private variable. Outside functions can call sayHello. SayHello function is public. It accesses a private variable, but the function itself is public. That property is public, and that can be accessed by outside code. So within the object stuff function, which lies outside of the object, we can call rectangle2.sayHello. This way, you're only accessing a public property, which is the sayHello function. That sayHello function calls the private var and prints it out to screen, uses console.log to print it out to screen. So rectangle2.sayHello should print out, I don't want anyone to know this, but I'm actually not just a rectangle, but also a square. This is allowed. However, accessing the private var from outside directly is an error and will only give you undefined. Going back to our object constructor, see if you can notice something here. So we have the private var, which can't be accessed outside this object, but it can be accessed within this object. So in case you were wondering what exactly is going on here, private var is local to this object constructor. sayHello is a function property specified on the rectangle object, which can access private var. We have private var and we have sayHello, and sayHello within the function body can access private var. A very good question to ask right now would be, how was a property able to access a variable that is defined outside that property? So we have the sayHello property. It's a function, and within the function body, it's able to access the private var variable which is defined outside that function body. How did that happen? This is our first encounter with closures. Closures in JavaScript are mind-bending and pretty awesome. This was just a teaser to what closures can do. There'll be a lot more about closures in lectures to come.